WNST and Sweet 16s as we get through the weekend here, but many other things in play, including the Capitals and the Wizards and the World Baseball Classic. And, of course, the NFL offseason. It's been a choppy thing up here in Baltimore. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Some comings, some goings, and still some very big needs. But it has been fun all week long to beat up on the Washington Redskins. They do a lot of that down there in the district these days, especially at the Washington Post. Mike Hume is the national sports assignment editor at the Washington Post, but he also does a bunch of fantasy football and some basketball. Loves him some hockey. I got some outdoor winter classic visions here on his Twitter page. You can follow there at Mike Hume Post. That's HUMEPOST. We welcome him back, one of our defending champions. 'Tis the season to beat up on Danny Boy, eh?
It seems like it's always a hunting season in that regard.
Well, I mean, this one is... Look, I mean, honesty and alternative facts are, as you well know, within the walls of your institution, discussed. When you get caught in the lie, there used to be some real shame involved in that, right? There used to be some real integrity lost. There used to be, takes a lifetime to build up a reputation in an afternoon to wreck it by lying or deceiving. Boy, I mean, the Snyder thing, this has been going on forever. But the lies that were made up as recently as last week in Indianapolis, it's just such a bad look, and I know the fans are allegedly as up in arms as they've ever been. When Boswell's telling people to go across the street and find something else to do, when Sally's pulling the takedown thing, enough is enough and all of that. Like, I've had Angelos here for 23 years, but I find it from a journalism perspective, the last couple of weeks have been really interesting in Washington to see how this is covered, why it's covered the way it is, and knowing at heart, most people there want the Redskins to win. Everyone sort of cheers for the Redskins there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this, if you look around to a lot of the fans on Twitter, a lot of the feedback we've been getting in our comments section, a lot of people think this is a low point, which is really saying something for this franchise. I mean, there was an absolute belief that Scott McCloughan was going to be the GM that was going to turn everything around. They were going to build through the draft. They were going to do it the right way. And, I mean, even entering this offseason, before there was any inkling that McCloughan could be fired, there was this sense that it was all going to fall apart, that they'd botched the Kirk Cousins contract situation, that Gruden was going to go into his prove-it year with either an interim quarterback or that they would somehow trade Cousins and then either end up with Colt McCoy or somebody new that they would find in free agency or the draft. And then by this time next year, the organization could have had a new head coach, a new quarterback, and a new GM. Well, now at least we're going to have a new GM, but Gruden gets an extension, and Cousins seems to be on track for a long-term contract extension, although there is definitely some possibility that he could be traded before the draft. So
well, what does it say when the quarterback's going into the owner saying, please, let me out, I want to go? Kind of reminds me of our GM here in Baltimore 2 years ago with the baseball team.
Well, we actually reported that story out. Mike Jones had a comment yesterday that, and Cousins himself addressed this on Adam Schefter's podcast, that it was really sort of twisted out of proportion. When he went and spoke with Bruce Allen and Dan Snyder, he was basically trying to gauge what they wanted to do. Do they want to trade him? And him saying, look, I'm cool with whatever, but I just would like to know where we're going. And they told him, look, we want you to be our quarterback long term, and that's the avenue we're going to pursue. So I think it probably got floated ahead of the start of free agency to gauge trade interest and see if they could generate any sort of calls. That's sort of the interpretation that we're taking away from it. But as far as him marching into the office and demanding a trade, I know you could ask Mike Jones or Liz Clark or Master Tesfatzian about that, and they would say that's not how Kirk operates, that's not how his agent operates, and that seems
But he is
to be
unhappy, right? He's unhappy.
I think that's very safe to say. I mean, if he had his way, he would have had this extension last year, and we wouldn't have anything to talk about right now. What fun would that be?
But he has made, $50 million over the last 2 years playing football, right? I mean, like, there comes a point where, take this up down the street with the Players Association for giving away the franchise tag because,
right.
That's the way the game works, and that always pisses off the guy that gets franchised, but he's also getting pissed off while he's also the highest paid guy in his profession in the world, on the planet, right? I mean, so there's a little bit of that going on as well, but literally being unhappy, and there's just been a lot of unhappy people around there, Mike. I don't need to tell you that. And this sort of latest transgression beginning with a semi-legendary player who has ties to the organization, is paid by the organization, calling the guy out for, personal off-the-field alcohol issues. The seed of that is just something that I don't think quality organizations would have going on. And I think in my mind's eye in Baltimore, I always compare the Ravens to the Redskins, say, well, what if it were this guy here in the media that said this and planted that, knowing that guy keeps the favor of the owner of the team? Boy, that would really, that would cause quite a stir around here, and that would be something that would be greatly, greatly frowned upon from the inside out.
Well, absolutely. And I think the problem that the Redskins run into so frequently is there's always so much smoke from something, whether it's like a little brush fire or just an inkling that something's a little off. And usually, rather than clear the smoke, they stoke the flames, and they create a bigger mess than they had initially. I mean, when Chris Cooley says that on the radio, all they have to do is step back and say, look, that's not how we talk about our general manager. Chris is at least they acknowledge that they've addressed it with Chris, and that issue goes away and does not blow up into what ended up becoming a precursor for McClellan's firing. Because then, obviously he's not at Redskins Park, he's not at the Combine, and the mystery begins.
Well, it's wrong either way. Let's go to it this way. If that's true, it's wrong in the way that it was handled. If it's not true, it was wrong in the way it was handled. So I don't know what to say about that as a guy who runs my lips for a living for 25 years on the radio and does this professionally and has kept some modicum of integrity, at least in some quarters here, by being honest and never lying to people and never being wrong on information that's key. That would be the type of stuff that would get me sued, quite frankly, Right.
Well, I mean, it's like you look at, history. The cover-up's always worse, and the lie is always worse than the actual transgression. I mean, and I think that's what we're going to find out, again, repeatedly, regardless of if it's the Redskins or some other sports team. The cover-up is always the problem. If you address this stuff, if Scott McCloughan is having trouble with alcohol, address it. If he's going to rehab, address it. If he is being a problem and it is a quote-unquote disaster, address it. Don't try and...
Yeah, if you're not getting along with him, just fire him. I mean, we're used to that in sports. Hey, I'm not getting along with my GM. We have a difference of opinion. I own the team. He's got to go. I'm the fall guy. Because you're the fall guy no matter what. You're the owner. Literally, that's the one constant we have here in Baltimore and in Washington with these franchises. The buck stops with Ted Leonsis and Peter Angelos and Steve Bisciotti and Ted Lerner. It has to. There has to be accountability from there down. That person has to be responsible for everything that happens under that tree, not just run into the light when the sun is shining and run into your cave when it's cloudy out. And Dan Snyder's been that guy from the beginning. Hey, look, I've dealt with him with Angelos up here. I know about the subversive stuff. I know about the fascist stuff. I know about the intimidation of media. I know about the quarantine of media. We have a president that gets out of bed every couple of days and lobs that at people reporting truth. So this is not just something Dan Snyder does, but it is something that when journalists shine a light on it and say, last week you told us it was his grandmother, the week before that you told us it was his alcohol problem, and now you're cutting him off at the head, 6 days later, and nobody's here to answer any questions. That can't be acceptable. That can't be acceptable to the media, can't be acceptable to the fans. It shouldn't be acceptable to the sponsors, quite frankly. And, we know from the Ray Rice incident up here, when he's on every billboard in the city and the video surfaces, ain't nobody looking good when that happens, Mike Hume.
Right. No, absolutely. All they're doing is creating more questions. And, it's one thing for the fans and for the media to question the organization. It's another when free agents and their agents are going to be questioning the team, because who's going to want to come to an organization that has fundamental stability problems? And that seems to be the perception they're giving off with all of this stuff.
yeah, who would want to work in this situation? And then there's the wide receivers getting out, and then there's the free agency thing on the field. They're not in a good position right now in that division, given where the Giants are, given where the Cowboys have been this year, and given where the Eagles kind of want to be. And drafted their quarterback last year. This success, the little run of success that they had there, feels like it's fracturing, and it feels like they're going to be looking at a 5 or 6 win season this year.
It certainly could be that way. I mean, I think everyone knew that or at least suspected that Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson were going to be heading out the door just because they were going to solicit offers that the Redskins weren't going to be willing to match. And I actually do like the Terrell Pryor signing. It's low risk, and I think he's got a lot of talent, and he could work well with Cousins. But this is a little bit of a reset. Like last season, the story around this franchise changes dramatically if they beat the Giants in Week 17. They were a 2-time playoff team, and they don't have the same feeling of disappointment again, of letdown again, of taking a big step back when they really missed the playoffs by 1 game. And they faced last season one of the toughest schedules in the NFL. This year, I think you're right. I mean, you look around the division this year. Last year we were coming off a year in which the NFC East was dreadful. This year, you have the Cowboys on the uptick. They found their franchise quarterback. Their offense looks as good as it's going to be going forward. The Giants' defense has pulled a complete 180, and now they're adding great components with Brandon Marshall to their offense. And you have the Philadelphia Eagles going out getting Alshon Jeffrey, and they have their franchise quarterback in Carson Wentz. So where do the Redskins fit into that picture? It's going to be really fascinating to see how that plays out early in the season in particular.
He is Mike Hume. He covers all things sports at The Washington Post. You can follow his journey out at The Washington Post, as well as on Twitter at Mike Hume Post. There's a beautiful outdoor winter classic setting on the front of his Twitter page, and I know everyone's rocking the red right now. It's certainly an ugly trip out to California. We're trying to get this thing righted. Head coach Barry Trotz will be joining us on Monday at Greenmount Station up in Hampstead, Carroll County for the Bone Marrow Registry. We'll be swabbing. Hopefully we'll have good tales to tell. Look, it's a foregone conclusion they're making the playoffs, right? This President's Trophy thing that was sort of urinated upon back in October, November as being insignificant. Somehow when they go to California and they can't get out of their own way, other for the Disney World rides and wherever not they were headed over the weekend. It was ugly, and now it's, well, who are we going to see in the first round again? And now we have to put the foot back on the gas. Nice to see them pick it up in the midweek and play better at home, but there's always going to be concerns about the Caps until they bring the chalice up Pennsylvania Avenue, right?
Absolutely. I mean, they're the epitome of you've achieved nothing until you actually achieve it. This is a great team. I mean, they are playing the best hockey that they have basically in the Ovechkin era, and that even includes this last road swing. And they've never done well on the West Coast. Whenever they go out to San Jose, they always get mauled in the Shark Tank. It is just always a beatdown. And it's just been compounded with that loss to the Stars before they left, and then that they couldn't get it going. They could never get it going on the West Coast. They pick it up against Minnesota, and I think you're going to start to see them step on the gas a little bit more. I think there is a sense of urgency. There was a players' meeting after the last loss that I think really is going to set them on a better trajectory where they won't make hockey their number one priority. Because let me tell you, the President's Trophy is not insignificant. There will be a big difference between finishing number one in the East and number two, because number two in the Metro will play number three in the Metro, which is the dumbest playoff system in all of professional sports.
We're going to bring that. I have a feeling that's coming up again, whether the Caps fans bring it up or whether it's anybody else in the division that finishes second and third.
Absolutely. I mean, the Penguins could have the same gripe. They're going to have this. Whoever of those two teams, or Columbus, finishes number two in the Metro will have the second best record in the Eastern Conference by far, and they will play the third best team in the entire Eastern Conference in the first round. That makes no sense. None whatsoever. Meanwhile, whoever finishes number one is probably going to play either Tampa Bay or Toronto or I forget who else is at the bottom there, the Islanders, who could still sneak in. But that's like a 10-point drop between the 7 seed and the 8 seed. I mean, that's night and day in the first round.
And just not what you want to see in the first round. I mean, as we sit here, staring at the NCAA tournament, Maryland got to avoid Duke. Now, whether they take advantage of that or not, they got to avoid Louisville because they weren't a 7, they were a 6. Anyone that's looked at brackets this week can look at it and say, if you were a Maryland fan, that doesn't mean you get through, at all. And certainly for the Caps, you kind of want to see Toronto or some young sort of happy to be their team, but until you go up to Toronto and walk in and see how big that's going to get for that franchise and that kid up there who's counted on to be the next Gretzky and all that good stuff, and how much money the coach is making, and all of that factors into it. But for the Capitals, and I've been saying this for weeks now, the Red Sox were that the first 15 years of my career, Mike, right? The Cubs have been that from the beginning of time for a century. I go back when the Rangers hadn't won a cup in forever. Toronto goes through that, right? The St. Louis Blues deal with that every year. There's lots of franchises that, let alone the Cleveland Browns types, right? But, the Lions deal with that in football. When you haven't won, the Buffalo Bills would deal with that if they ever got back there. So there's a lot of teams out there that have disappointed in playoffs year after year after year, decade after decade after decade, but it does get heavy on the Caps, and I know most of these guys, and look, Ovechkin, Backstrom, a couple of these guys have been there for a long chunk of this, but it's all kind of new to TJ Oshie, and certainly for the rentals like Shattenkirk, who are playing for contracts. This is a money time for a lot of these guys, as well as probably for most of them, their best opportunity, their best group of teammates, their best pathway to getting their name on the trophy.
Well, absolutely. And this is going to be another one of those seasons where we won't know the story and we won't really know who this Caps team is until they get punched in the mouth in the playoffs. If they lose a game, if some goalie shuts them out and they put 40 shots on net and they lose 1-0 in overtime,
in game one, right? Or in game 3 when it's split, right? That's my fear, is them falling behind in a series. That's why I don't want a tough first round. That's why I don't want a 6 or a 7 gamer. I want a series at home where they go up 2-0, win the thing in 5 games, take a few days. That's what they need. They don't need one of these claw fests with the Islanders or the Flyers, the Rangers that they've had in recent years. Avoiding all of that would just getting through the first round quietly would be, a confidence boost for everyone.
Right. No, and I think even if they do face the Penguins in the second round, it's going to be a tough matchup. But I think you got to go through them eventually. So if you beat them, that's such a morale booster. It's such a boost for your psyche. It's like when the Red Sox finally came back and beat the Yankees in 2004. Suddenly you think, hey man, this is a new story. It didn't end the way it always ended this time. And now you can really be potent and change your script. And that, I think more than anything, if they can get into a second round series against the Penguins and then beat the Penguins, there is literally no doubt in my mind they're going to win the Cup.
As a guy who walked into that locker room in 1984 as a kid, covering the Craig Laughlins and the Gartners and the Langways and the Christians and the Bobby Cap and Scott Stevens and all those guys, it seems almost inconceivable. And then you consider what the Wizards are doing, right? It's almost like for the last quarter of a century, I said this, and I don't mean to be flippant, it's like the Wizards have been playing in the NIAI or AIA or Division II or Division III or someplace where no one notices you. It's almost like they've been ineligible to win the NBA championship, where the Capitals have been in play every year for a long time,
right.
And this is the one year where it feels like it's in play. And look, for the Nationals and the Orioles around here, I even think for the Redskins, whether they really could win a championship at any point, I have friends that are Redskin fans that are eternally optimistic that this is the year they win 10 games and get a wild card and go on a run, right? And the Ravens have done it. So the Ravens are the only team around here that do win, quite frankly, or have won championships. But this is a special period in this spring, I think, with the Wizards and the Caps, because you can make a case that the Wizards are as likely to be involved in late May as the Caps are, and people just discount the Caps. But here come the Wizards, who last week when the Caps were losing focus in California, the Wizards were doing unprecedented things in the middle of the night, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the Wizards story this season has been underrated, if anything, probably because of the way the season started, and everyone immediately said, "Oh, well, okay, here we go again."
Well, how could you get a
And
buy into that? If you watched them play in November, you would never, ever think that they're capable of being 20 games over 500. I mean, at all, right?
totally different team, totally different team. And then Ernie goes out, Ernie Grunfeld, the GM, goes out and actually fixes the bench. That was a complete and abject disaster for the first half of the season. And now look at them. I mean, there's no reason to not think they can give the Cavaliers a actual series if they get that far in the playoffs. Like, we're talking a 2 or 3 seed in the East for the Wizards if they keep this up. And just avoiding that second round matchup with the Cavs, I mean, they could be in the Eastern Conference Finals very easily.
And waiting for LeBron to turn his ankle, as I say, or get a hangnail, or hurt his pinky on a shot, or just something that goes a little wrong with him, like Steph Curry last year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always that chance. I mean, the thing with the Cavaliers is, yes, they're extremely talented, and yes, when they play the best basketball that they can play, no one's going to beat them in the Eastern Conference. But like you said, LeBron gets banged up a little bit. Love is apparently held together by balsa wood and cotton swabs right now. And Kyrie Irving has injury history as well. And if something happens to one of those three in the playoffs, well, then all bets are off, because now we're talking about a very different Cavaliers team. And, I mean, the Wizards, the same thing could happen to them. They could get injured. But John Wall, Bradley Beal, and Otto Porter are playing lights-out basketball right now. The rest of the team is coalesced around them. And Bogdanovich coming over at the trade deadline has really helped their bench. I mean, he's just a tremendous spot-up shooter. And with Wall being able to drive and kick out to guys like Beal, Porter, and Bogdanovich for three-pointers, and this offense it's humming. And that's something that I never dreamed of saying in November.
Yeah, even in Minnesota the other night, they're down 10 points, 10 minutes left to go in the game. You're like, maybe Bogdanovich will hit a couple here. Wall will drive the lane, get to the free throw line. They'll hit a couple of threes, and they're going to win by 6 points or force overtime, as they've done a lot lately. You have a confidence. I mean, it was like this with the Orioles in their good years, where they're down 3 runs in the 6th, and you're like, somebody will hit a home run, and then there's baseball, dude, right? Like, I'm 25 years into this. Baseball used to really matter in Baltimore. Like, every pitch of spring training mattered. I feel like what the Terps have done, and I know in your area, Virginia's down there playing good ball as well, and we had the Mount St. Mary's story here this week. But the Caps, the Wizards, the Redskins' dysfunction, the Ravens, and free agency and the NFL Combine and the draft all coming together, it's really diminished spring training to some degree. And the World Baseball Classic's been nice and fun and all that stuff, but it's also made me sort of not want to watch the Orioles because their best players aren't even there this week, and hopefully into next week as well. I think the Dominican-U.S. thing's been some nice drama, the players and all that, but boy, spring training is it goes away when real games come on at 7 o'clock every night, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I can't tell you the last time we talked about the Nationals. Like, we were talking about, all right, well, is Harper going to have a bounce-back year? Yeah, okay. Okay, we're done. Let's
get to that in June. Let's see how the Wizards and the Caps do first, right?
Exactly. I think, the Nationals had their shot last year, and it was the same old story. And, again, that team isn't going to be able to prove anything until at least, August or September, when you get into the stretch run. It's the playoffs. I mean, they've set the bar at a specific level, and it's the first round of the playoffs, and they got to clear that before they can really advance as a franchise. The problem with the Orioles, they play in the AL East. So you have maybe like 1 or 2 season windows where you can really catch on. They get into the wild card game a couple of times. But I mean, the Red Sox aren't going to stay down for long. The Yankees aren't going to stay down for long. And while I do think the Yankees might take a step back this year, compared to last year, the Red Sox have probably the best pitching staff in baseball, as long as David Price's arm holds up, it seems. So it's really going to be a baseball season that, for this region, I think is defined by September and October. And until we get to that point, particularly as long as the other Washington teams, the Caps and the Wizards, are in the playoffs, and the Redskins are, they still have the NFL draft if nothing else goes horribly awry for them. The Nats and the Orioles are going to be pretty far down the old depth chart there.
Well, I know you've stuck Dave Sheinin back on baseball, and I saw him down in Sarasota the other day, so we're going to have him on next week. And, it's funny to me the Orioles are still screaming about market size and how much money we have or don't have. And meanwhile, the Masson hearing got postponed on Tuesday from the snow. Mr. Angelo says several $100 million of disputed money, several $100 million of disputed money sitting in his coffers right now. And there's no thought that Manny Machado or Britton are going to be re-upping anytime soon. And, they still cry about money up here. They have all of their money, all the Major League Baseball money, and all of the Nationals money, and it's still not enough money. Where do they say greed was good? Oh, the White House. I remember. Mike Hume joining us here. He is Mike Hume Post. He is the national sports assignment editor at the Washington Post. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Mike Hume Post and at WashingtonPost.com. Lots going on down there, man. We'll stay in touch, and plenty going on up here as opening day's coming and this NFL free agency thing. And, hey, man, we got the combine, the draft up in Philly. I would think there's a ton of Redskin and Ravens fans. I think it'll be the most attended draft ever, given how many fan bases can drive to Philly and be a part of it.
Well, especially if the Redskins are talking about taking the quarterback. So another reason to attend.
Somebody will be doing the Ricky Williams dance and trading after a team away to get something. Who knows? It might be for Jimmy Garoppolo before it's all over with, right?
For sure.
Great having you on, man. Thanks for the visit.
All right, take care.
You got it. Mike Hume from the Washington Post joining us here at WNST. You can find anything you missed this week, including full hoopology, out in the Buy a Toyota audio vault 24 hours a day. From anywhere in the world, just download the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear, mobile, iPad, desktop, car, wherever you are. AM 1570 is there for you as well. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox every morning. That is brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It's $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And now that we've cleared away a little of the snow and the ice, we can get ready for bikini season and going down the ocean. That'll be great. Bring on 75. My Latin blood needs that at this point. Last but never least, any breaking news that happens. As you know, if you're on the WNST text service, it is the best thing we do around here, whether it's Ravens, whether it's Orioles, whether it's Terps. If it's breaking news, you get it first on the WNST text service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. It is free to sign up online. And, of course, Dennis Galatzos will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST. I'm out on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel, the hardest working man in Baltimore sports media. Somebody said that on the internet the other day. I just wanted to say it. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.